the 3 weeks that have led up today, Brian is going to tell me now what they are, known in Hebrew as Bein HaMatzarim, between the straits of distress. It's the saddest period, the past 3 weeks. And it leads up to tonight, where we will be joining the Beit Emmanuel Zoom service to remember the destruction of both our temples. Customs of mourning are observed during this time and commemorate the destruction of both the first and second temple, hundreds of years apart. This 3-week period of mourning begins on the 17th day of Tammuz with a fast of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz and concludes on the 9th day of Av, which is the fast of Tisha B'Av. And that starts, Brian, tonight. Brian, who is really a great scholar of Torah, says we really should have started last night according to the calendar, but because it was Shabbat, we start the mourning for our temple tonight. Those of you who have access to Zoom, please join us. It is quite amazing that our Torah and Hashem puts Shabbat, what we're doing in this shul today, before any other occasion. It is the most important law of all to be in shul on Shabbat. Jews are the people who refuse to be comforted because they never gave up hope. Yaakov, Jacob, did eventually see Joseph again. Remember Jacob? He thought his son had been killed by wild beasts. The brothers deceived the father because they hated and were jealous of him. And yet, in spite of having evidence that his son was no longer alive, Jacob never ever gave up hope, and he was one day reunited with his son when he was second to Pharaoh in Egypt. Rachel's children did return to the land. She didn't see it, but spiritually, even though she was with Hashem, they returned to the land. Jerusalem today, isn't it amazing, is once again the Jewish homeland. And yet, you know, when we lost our temples, when we were scattered throughout the world under the Roman Empire, maybe there were many people who thought, oh, that's the end of us, we'll never get it back. Not so. The Jews never give up hope, no matter how hopeless and impossible things seem. And Israel today, the state of Israel, is there. We've got it back. Many people, Brian, see Israel as a third temple itself. So all the evidence may suggest otherwise, Jennifer. Irretrievable loss. A country, and Israel is not perfect. No one is born perfect. And Israel does a lot of mistakes. And we have every right to talk about those mistakes, but it is based on one of the greatest justice systems in the world. And its judiciary is slowly correcting any mistakes that its leaders make. So, we've got to understand Jews never believed the evidence because they had something else to set against it, a faith, a trust, an unbreakable hope that proves stronger than any historic inevitability. This is so important. It is not too much to say that the Jews survived. Every tragedy was sustained by one thing, and we've said it before, hatikva, and hope. So you and I are still here. And I just want to conclude my drosha with talking about what many believe to be the most important aspect that the Jewish nation, Hashem, and the 5 books of Moses have contributed to the entire world, and that is justice. As you heard, I read it for you. Justice throughout the generations lies at the beating heart of the Jewish faith. Albert Einstein memorably spoke of Judaism's pursuit of knowledge for its own sake. Einstein, he was a scientist, he was secular, Brian, not religious, but the most secular Jew knows our history, knows Torah, and has it in their very bones. And to listen to what Einstein, he said the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake, an almost fanatical love of justice, is in the very DNA of the Jewish people. And he also was amazed. And towards the conclusion of his life, he did believe there was a higher energy, which was basically goodness expressed in the world. But let me just conclude with something here. It's remarkable that justice has been so key to the Jewish people. One of the most famous Jewish lawyers of our time, Alan Dershowitz, wrote a book about Abraham. So we're going back now to the first person who was not a Jew then, Jennifer. He was an Aramean, like everyone was in those days, but he had this idea of one God. And he is seen as the first Jewish lawyer, the patriarch of the legal profession, a defense lawyer for the damned who is willing to risk everything, even fighting with God in defense of his clients. That's what I like the most. Whether it was Hashem testing or whether it was our great leadership and prophets, they argued with God. The founder not just of monotheism, but a long line of Jewish lawyers. So when you look at the way Abraham spoke to God on behalf of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, no, you can't. God said they were all bad. He said, no. And ultimately he came down to, if there's just 1 or 10 just people, you cannot destroy everyone because of the evil. It's a courtroom drama with Abraham acting as lawyer for the citizens of the town, and God, as it were, the accused. So this is the forerunner of many great Jews. And in modern times, Jews reach prominence in America. Among them, many others, but I want to mention one, taking us back last night to Marion's beautiful accolade to women who were heroes and who moved society forward, and remind you of one of the greatest judges that has ever lived. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was the first Jewish woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and that, I'm telling you, in honor that August as well is Women's Month. Every part of society which has been oppressed, depressed, degraded, comes forward and claims their rightful place. In Britain, between 1996 and 2008, 2 of Britain's 3 Lord Chief Justices were Jewish: Peter Taylor, Harry Wolff, and others. In Germany, in the early 1930s, before the Shoah, though Jews were only 0.7% of the population, they represented 16.6% of lawyers and judges. So basically, when you look at our Hebrew Bible, it is summed up in one beautiful Hebrew saying, which, by the way, this synagogue we're sitting in is also a heritage site of the city of Joburg. In 2016, we dedicated this magnificent synagogue to following justice for ourselves, for those who are horrifically treated today, like many of our migrant workers as our refugees, and for justice to the poor that have been left over from the apartheid area on our doorstep, and due to the total inequality between rich and poor, where our government over the last decade has failed us totally. And we have failed ourselves too. But the beautiful saying about justice, which is the heart of Devarim words, is tzedek, tzedek, tzedor. Justice, justice you shall pursue, so that you may live and prosper in the land the Lord has given you. And okay. So let me just share a few ideas while we conclude, just before we conclude the service. The written Torah that we've been reading is min hashemayim, from heaven. The oral Torah, the Talmud, is not from heaven. That was written, am I right, by rabbis. Judaism, therefore, listen to this, is a continuous conversation between the giver of the law in heaven, the words of the Torah, and the way you and I, like the oral law, interpret those laws into our actions. The way you come to shul, the way you treat a beggar on the street, the way we treat foreigners. So we are continuously interpreting these laws that we read about, as the great sages did in the oral law. And that is, it's really fantastic when you think of what our faith, and I thank God that we're part of the Jewish faith and we have access to studying Torah, and always remember to relating the parasha, what we read, not only to those times, but to our own times, to our own politics, to our own people, and to the world. So this is what Jeremiah meant, by the way, when he said, this is a covenant I will make with the house of Israel after all of those days. And this is a covenant God has made. A covenant is a contract. You do this and I'll do that. But if you don't do this, I can't do that. The two are completely dependent on each other. And let me conclude with this. Jeremiah told us, another great prophet, what Hashem did. This is a covenant, a contract I will make with the house of Israel after those days, said the Lord. Now, I will put my law, L-A-W, within them. I will write it in their hearts, and I will be their God, and they will be my people. So the law, justice, seeing that justice is done as it is done in our courts, in the constitutional court, as it is done in the most magnificent justice system in Israel, in their Supreme Court. That is the contract between us and Hashem, that we see that justice is done for those around us who don't have what we have, and to see that justice is done for those that have so much, abuse it, and hurt the people. Shabbat Shalom.